Vice President Harris will be campaigning in Atlanta today, and protesters have taken to the streets across Venezuela after incumbent President Nicolas Maduro was declared the winner of Sunday's presidential election. Good morning, I'm Corva Coleman from NPR News, and here are today's top stories. Vice President Harris will be campaigning in Georgia this afternoon. Raul Bali of member station WABE says Harris plans to speak in Atlanta.
The Harris campaign says the vice president is expected to meet with reproductive rights activists here in Atlanta. Expect her speech to bring up the overturn of Roe v. Wade by a U.S. Supreme Court with 3 justices appointed by former President Donald Trump, new abortion restrictions in Iowa, along with similar restrictions in Georgia that have been in place for more than 2 years. The campaign says the vice president is expected to be joined by Georgia Democratic U.S. Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens, and former candidate for Georgia Governor Stacey Abrams. Each has some level of a national profile. For NPR News, I'm Raul Bali in Atlanta.
Meanwhile, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper says he won't be Harris's vice presidential running mate. He was being vetted as a possible Democratic contender. In a statement online, Cooper says now is not the right time for North Carolina or for him to run as part of a Democratic ticket. Former President Donald Trump says he will probably end up debating Vice President Harris. He had originally agreed to debate President Biden on September 10th. But Trump said yesterday in an interview that he can also make a case for not debating Harris. Meanwhile, Trump praised his own work in the last matchup with Biden.
We had a debate. It was a great debate. It was actually, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have debated so well because if I didn't, that was the end of him. Because from that day on, you could see that he was not going to be, in my opinion, I said, I don't think he's going to make it anymore. Now I have her. I would rather run against her than him. I think she's easier than he is.
Trump spoke to Fox News. Protesters filled the streets yesterday across Venezuela. They turned out after Venezuelan officials declared incumbent Nicolas Maduro the winner of this week's presidential election. Opponents say Maduro and his supporters stole the election through fraud. NPR's Calley reports from Caracas. The opposition and regional leaders are calling on Venezuelan authorities to provide proof of Maduro's victory.
Demonstrators have been clashing with security forces around Caracas, protesting officials awarding authoritarian leader Maduro a third 6-year term. 18-year-old university student Daker Boades says he has no doubt that Maduro won through fraud. The U.S. and regional leaders have called on electoral officials to show proof of the win. They want the printouts of all precinct tallies. Venezuela says 7 countries have violated its sovereignty by not accepting Maduro's win and ordered their diplomats to leave the country. Carrie Khan, NPR News, Caracas.
The New York Times and other news outlets are reporting that William Calley Jr. has died at the age of 80. He was a U.S. Army lieutenant during the Vietnam War and the only person convicted of the murder of hundreds of unarmed South Vietnamese men, women, and children. It was the atrocity known as the My Lai Massacre of 1968. U.S. troops also slaughtered livestock and burned the village. Calley maintained that he was following orders. Later in life, he issued an apology. At the Paris Olympics, the U.S. men's gymnastics team has won a bronze medal in the all-around event. As NPR's Becky Sullivan reports, it's the first team medal for the U.S. since 2008.
Men's gymnastics have long played second fiddle to women's in the U.S. They're underdogs on the international stage compared to powerhouses like China, Japan, and Russia. But this year, Russia didn't field a team due to its war in Ukraine, and the U.S. has a new generation of talented gymnasts. On Monday, as the U.S. progressed through each of the 6 events, the gymnasts stuck landing after landing. The team made no major mistakes, and by the last routine of the night, Steven Nedorozic on the pommel horse, the bronze medal was in the bag.
During that dismount, I was just already smiling, I think. I saluted the judges and looked at these guys, and they were jumping up and down. I mean, it was just the greatest moment of my life, I think.
The women's team all-around final takes place Tuesday. Becky Sullivan, NPR News, Paris.
I'm Corva Coleman, NPR News from Washington.